A little more than a year ago, I did a video when I was taking a look at the new Cray-Cross epic decks that were coming out in set 5. Well, it's time for set 11, where these cards actually get upgraded cross rides. Let's take a look what these are like. Here are the original 5 Thegrea coming in at twice Cray-Cross epic boss units from set 5. These had a sort of very exciting path coming out from set 5. There was a lot of hype built around the glitter mechanic as well as the dual nation units that these cards came with, but of course the glitter mechanic just ended up being a Vanguard locked skill that really didn't matter. It was just a way, I guess, for Bushi to save space on typing in if your Vanguard is this, even though they end up doing that anyways. And the dual nation didn't really matter except for Maple and the grade 1 Kheios. However, these decks did have a little bit of time to shine. Green Deku here ended up being a very aggressive early game rush deck that had the patented Rora Raylina Momoke column that could swing in and do a whole butt ton of damage early on. We had Tamayura, who was a very solid deck coming out of set 5 and continued to be very good, only not seeing as much play because, one, at least in English, its very powerful order was very difficult to get, and also it was just extremely counterblast heavy come set 8. Kheios was a deck that was constantly memed on as being this weird, bad Highlander deck, and is now, as of, you know, set 10 in English, regarded as actually a very strong rogue deck. And in set 11, looking at one of the best decks to come out of that set, to be honest. I actually think it's the best deck that's coming out of that set. Thegrea was a deck that, similar to Tamayura, had a very strong showing coming out the box, literally being pretty complete out the box, whereas everyone else kind of felt a little bit incomplete. And she had some pretty strong showings early on, looking pretty good, looked as a very solid rogue deck, but kind of fell off pretty quickly, and kind of similar to Tamayura because of her order, did not see a lot of play in the English side. Finally, Eva, of course, was one of the decks that, similar to Kheios, was kind of memed on and being really bad, but a lot of saw pretty good potential in Eva, myself included. If you don't believe me, watch the previous video. And then, of course, when she got one card, she instantly rose to being the best deck in the format for basically up until the time of this set being released in Japan. All of these cards here managed to get new cross rides. While it's not typically actually cross rides are a mechanic from way back when in Vanguard where you would ride a grade 3 and it would get a skill. Sometimes depending if you rode over a specific grade 3, but specifically it was if you had a specific grade 3 in your soul, you get plus 2k on both players' turn, and sometimes an effect would have less of a cost, or you could only use it if you had that specific grade 3 in your soul. But it's supposed to look like the upgraded version of that grade 3, without it actually being upgraded in terms of like disregarding the old grade 3. Because all of these new cross rides need the old grade 3s to actually function. Let's take a look at the first one here for Green Deku here in the Viridescent Flash Green Deku, which seems like a strange name, but all of these new grade 3 cross rides also have a same naming pattern, which it is actually the name of the attack of the unit it is for, and then the name of the unit. So when Green Deku does his attack, that is the name of it. All of these will have 2 skills, which are going to be extremely similar in how they're structured, except for the Thegrea one, which is a little bit weird, but that's just because Thegrea is, you know, Thegrea. But they will all have a skill that says when you ride over the original from set 5, the grade 3 from set 5, you get a skill, and you also activate Persona Ride. The skill is typically in line with what the original's effect was, just better to regard, or costless, or however you want to look at it. And then they have another skill where, either on attack or an act or whatever, you bind the original copy of the grade 3 from set 5, and then you get some sort of skill. Then at the end of the turn, you go back to the original grade 3 from set 5. So that next turn, you can of course Persona Ride and do the same first effect again. This one here specifically says, when placed by riding over the original Green Deku from set 5, you call up to 2 plant tokens to Graveyard Circle, and those plant tokens get the ability where, until the end of your opponent's next turn, if they're retired from rearguard circle, you draw 1 card. And you also activate Persona Ride. Then it has a skill that says when this unit attacks, you bind the original set 5 green Deku from your soul, choose one of your glitter rearguards, and until the end of the turn, both the chosen unit and this Vanguard get 5k. And the Vanguard actually gets a critical as well. And then finally at the end of the turn, you take the card you bound for this effect and you ride it as rest. Of course, it also has glitter, which, you know, both of these effects are insanely good. We also got a support card here, the Affectionate Hunter Matthias, who has 2 skills. When this is placed on Rearguard Circle from your hand, if you have a grade 3 or greater green Deku on Vanguard Circle, you pay the cost of Soul Blast 1 and retire 2 of your other rearguards to choose a grade 2 or less from your drop and call it to Rearguard Circle. So you can choose the 2 tokens that you got from Green Deku's skill, the new one, retire them, draw 2 cards. Then it also has a skill where in front row Rearguard Circle, at the start of the battle phase, if you have both a Green Deku and a Realinda, you can just call a plant token. The new Green Deku is pretty good. A lot of these new cross rides, they sort of help out the original builds of the deck. And Green Deku, I think, is really good because, like I said, it focused on being really aggressive early on, throwing a bunch of pressure early on, but then kind of really quickly running out of gas. Typically, that gas is having cards in hand, which means they can't continue their aggression or they can't guard the opponent's incoming attacks. This first skill here to have your tokens, you know, have that draw 1 skill is pretty good. This can also be activated on your opponent's turn when you're on the original Green Deku and you use the skill to retire tokens to get power to the end of an attack. You can then draw on your opponent's turn, which is pretty huge as well. The skill of having the Vanguard get a little bit of power and a critical is huge as well, because originally the Vanguard skill did not really have any pressure on it. So now it actually also has pressure, which is very good. Matthias is alright. You know, the first skill is a little bit too cost heavy unless you specifically have the tokens. Getting a sort of Monster Reborn on something that's on a unit is pretty good, so you don't have to play an order. You can very easily play the promo order that turn as well. Is good. It's not having counterblast is good, but still has a massive soul issue. I would say even a little bit more now, because for a lot of these new cross rides, you have to remember you have to have the original in soul, so you can't soul blast it out. So rather than thinking you have 1 soul, you have 0 soul, if that's the only card in your soul. Which originally for Green Deku you would Persona Ride and you get +1 soul, which was great. Now you don't get that if you didn't have any soul originally, so it's just something to keep in mind. I played the deck a little bit myself, and here's what I came up with. It's similar to what's already being played right now. The only main difference is that we're using the Pineapple Shooter, I think is the name, from set 10, which is a unit that says when it's either retired or on place, you give one of your grade 0s 5k and you soul charge. I think you may soul charge. So this helps out with your soul issue. You can use this instead of the Signpost Fairy. While the Signpost Fairy gets Momoke to be really big, this instead gives you the power to still make Momoke pretty big, but also get some soul that you can use for later on. We're only playing 1 copy in the ride deck of the original, and then playing 4 of the new one in the main deck. That is a pattern that is going to be used for most of these decks here. Everything else is typically the same. 4 copies of the grade 2 Realinda, 3 of the grade 3, who I'm not a huge fan of myself, 4 of the order that lets you search out Realindas and give all of your tokens 5k power. The Burrow Mushrooms, which is the best card that Green Deku ever got. And then of course the trigger lineup is going aggressive with the draw triggers, because you still want to get cards in hand and you're still very piece aligned. Getting the tokens to draw here does help out a little bit, which is why you can play maybe an extra copies of crits, but you still want to play extra draws just to make sure you can get your pieces and still have the gas to keep going and close out the game. For the over trigger, I've gone with the red one here. I think since the new cross ride gives a crit, you don't really need the blue one, but you can definitely play the blue one. The only reason is that the blue one just lets you add a card from drop and lets you have one of your probably rearguards get a crit. You can actually, instead of that, get 4 attacks with 100 million power with the red one, because you can choose your Momoke, give it 100 million power, and have it attack twice. So that's 200 million attacks. Then you can pass that 100 million to the grade 2 Realinda, that's 300 million attacks. And then you can go in with the grade 3, who gets the power of the Momoke, when you call it out, you tribute both the grade 2 and Momoke, so that's a 400 melee attack. So that's either guaranteed damage or 4 guaranteed PGs. So the red one I think is definitely the best option here. Overall, I really like this new green Deku. I like the direction it's taking the deck in. It's making it still play in with that aggro rush build, but improving the deck so slightly by not tampering with it as much. And these skills are fine. It's nothing too crazy, however. I think it is possibly the weakest out of all of the 5. If we're being honest, out of all of the 5, yeah, it's probably the lowest. I think it's definitely improved the deck, but definitely not as much as all the other decks are improved, or just, you know, outside of this set or the 5 that we're talking about. Unfortunately, I think Rora is the weakest out of these 5 right now. Next up, we've got Tamayura here. She's got the upgraded form in the Will-O-Wisp Daybreak. Has 2 skills. When this is placed over by riding the Deepening Knight Tamayura, search your deck or drop for up to 1 order without Regalia piece. Reveal it, put it into your hand, and if you search your deck, shuffle your deck. Then it has the skill, when this unit attacks a Vanguard, you pay the cost of bind a Deepening Knight Tamayura from your soul. Choose up to 1 card each with Rimuri and Rami in their card names from your soul. Call them to rear article, and they get 5k power until the end of that turn. And at the end of that turn, you ride the card bound for this skill as rest. Also has glitter. Tamayura actually didn't get an additional support card specifically for Tamayura, and that's because the deck is already super tight. The deck was crazy tight after set 8 when we got the new grade 1 Rimi and Rami, and the problem the deck had is that it was very, very, very counterblast heavy, even with it having a counter charger. So it was very difficult to actually get to do what you need to do. It was still a solid deck, it just didn't really have that sort of consistency to rely on. Whereas now, this kind of fixes everything that the deck had problems with. For 1, you still get Persona Ride. For 2, because the original skill activating at the beginning of Ride phase, you still get the 5k to your front row, or the 5k applied to you, the player, not the unit. So you still get 15k to your front row. When you call out Rimi and Rami, they get another 5k. So those actually come in with 20k extra power, which is huge as well. The second skill here to call out stuff is not Counterblast, so you actually have extra Counterblast to play around with, which is also very huge, as well as being able to search out an order. Tamayura's orders are really strong, so being able to search any of them out on ride or just reuse them from drop is really strong. And you can also even search out your Blitz Order PG if you have it in drop. Of course, if you already used it, it's going to get bound or removed from the game, I think specifically. But if you had discarded it for ride or whatever the case may be, or it's just in drop, you put it in soul somehow, you can just get it back, which is pretty huge, or you can just search it out from deck. That being said, the build is pretty easy to picture. The only real thing that is not just a Tamayura order, or Rimi and Rami PGs and triggers is 2 copies of Forktail that I put in there, just because I wanted to have a little bit more deck thinning that was tied to a unit, a little bit more shield value, as well as maybe give Tamayura a booster. But you can very easily just turn that into 4th copies of both the grade 1s Rimi and Ramis, which I think everyone's going to end up playing. You need 2 copies, you just need copies of the grade 3 order from set 8, which just says Soul Blast 2, choose a Rimi and Rami from your drop and call it out, because this lets you do a lot of things. It lets you Soul Blast 2, which means of course you can just select the grade 2s that you're going to want to call out to your front row. You don't have to select the grade 2s, you can select out the grade 1s, but most importantly what this lets you do is it lets you get a full board without having to play anything from your hand other than that order. Because you can play this order, Soul Blast out the grade 1s, Rimi and Rami, and then choose the grade 2s from your drop and call them out. Use the skill of the grade 1s to call themselves out, Counterblast 2, and then you have a full board. And then since you don't need any more Counterblast for your Daybreak, Tamayura, you're just fine with that. And you get a full board, you don't have to play anything from hand. So that's pretty huge. Very good order, and especially since you can just get that on ride. But the other order that is amazing, of course, is the Broken Toys, which is so good because it lets you look at the top 7, choose from your drop and from the top 7 you're looking at a Rimi and Rami, put them into soul. If you have a Rimi and Rami in your soul of any type, draw a card. Really huge. There are, I think, a few couple of orders you can mess around with in Dragon Empire, but I think you're just going to stick to what is Tamayura specific, and you're going to do it this way. I think Daybreak actually makes the deck maybe like the second or third best, tied for second, if not third best out of the, upgrades for the Cray-Cross epics. It's definitely better than Green Deku. Whereas like this, mainly all it does is fix the counterblast issue, but that's just to say that the build for Tamayura and all the cards were already good. They just had that one problem, which has now been relatively resolved. So I think this is really strong coming out of set 11. And if you need to get your cards for the upcoming set, please check out Saga Concepts. You can use the link in the description below to help yourself and help the channel out. Then we've got Kheios here, Poaching Fang's Kheios, who I think, without a doubt, is the winner for set 11. It is the strongest out of all of these Cray-Cross epic units to get an upgrade with the Soul Oratorial Kheios. This fixes everything Kheios needs and makes it so good. So we have two skills here. When this unit is placed by riding from an approaching Fang's Kheios, you may soul charge 3. May soul charge, you don't have to. Then, choose up to 2 cards from your soul. Put 1 card from among them to your hand and call the rest to rear guard circle. And activate Persona Ride. So you can search out 2 Mechanics from your soul. Put 1 in hand, put 1 on board. Search out the grade 1 Mechanic if you need an extra soul charge. Then pull out the other Mechanic from your soul. Also Persona Ride. Also a different named Kheios from the original Kheios. Then, it's a bit of a typo here, it says auto, should be act, sorry about that. Once per turn on Vanguard Circle, if your soul has 13 or more cards with different card names, you bind the original Approaching Fang's Kheios from your soul. Until the end of that turn, all of your units get 10k power. And this unit, the Vanguard, gets an additional critical. So this just fixes everything. It lets you get your Kheios, your Mechanis. It is a new Kheios that gives you Persona Ride without being the same name as the original one. Lets you soul charge 3, power up your solars, get a bunch of cards in soul. It gives everyone, including the Vanguard, 10k power, making that Vanguard swing threatening because now it also has a critical on it. This is such a huge upgrade. I think Kheios was already in a really strong spot after getting the one who governs Kheios and also the grade 1 Mechani in set 8. It just didn't really have the consistency, and I think it still kind of has that to an extent, but I think now, if you survive till turn 4, you're gonna win. I think this deck is extremely strong now. We did get an additional card here in the Inciting Corruption Agamantha, who has 2 skills when it's placed on Rearguard Circle. If you have a Vanguard or Kheios, you counterblast 1, look at the top 2, put 1 in your hand, put the rest into Soul. So this can be counterblast 1, Soul Charge 2, Electro Spartan, or counterblast 1, draw 1, put a card in Soul. Very good. Also has a skill in Soul, where if you place a Makani, if you have a Chaos Vanguard, you discard a card, Soul Charge 1, and call this out from Soul to Rear, and it gets boost. I don't like the fact that you have to discard 1. I feel like this skill wasn't that strong to begin with for you needing to discard 1, but okay, Papa Bushi, if that's what you think. It's pretty good. Gives you a 10k, 20k booster with Chaos' skill. It fills up, a card, so if you play 2 of these, for example, you have 2 of them in Soul, you can pull it out, possibly replace it with another card that actually has a different name, so not half bad. The draw early is pretty good. This is what the list looks like. It's very, again, similar to what is already being played. The only main difference is that I've cut down on 1 copy of the one who governs Kheios, because I think with the new grade 3, you don't need as many copies of the order, because you really only use the order once on turn 3, maybe again, and that's it. I don't think you need as many copies of it. Where at the same time, it is a grade 1 order. You can technically use it whenever, and it is possible on turn 2 to have a good amount of Chaoses in your soul. It is viable to play it. So it's kind of up to you, but I think for the sake of making space, I think 3 is fine. Also gives you less things that have the same name that can go into soul. There's a couple of flex spots here. You can change the Lin for something else. You can take out the Queen Lu for something else if you'd like. I think the Agamantha is pretty good to play at least 1 of, possibly even 2. I think 2 is not half bad. The Horatio and the Grasper are pretty good just because they're boosters and allow you to aggress really early. You can also take out the Miroslava, who kind of just threw in to, instead of playing the one who governs Kheios after that Persona Ride, to pull out any extra copies of the grade 3 that I have, just so that I can then Persona Ride next turn, because of course it just stays in Soul, you don't get it back or anything like that. But that's generally how I think the list is going to go. There is of course new triggers that you can play around with, so you have a more expansive way to play your triggers. You don't have to play very as awkward numbers. You can very easily play the more classic 7-3 or whatever split. But I still think you need draw triggers over fronts. You can play a few fronts if you'd like. Fronts I think are still okay. Did I say 7-3? I meant 7-4. And as well, of course, you always have the flexibility with the heals and everything else. I think this deck is going to be extremely good. It is the best deck out of all of the Cray-Cross Epic units decks coming out of set 11. This is number 1. I think it is sort of this weird tie, I think, for Thegrea and Tamayura for second. I think Eva might be third, and I think Green Deku is fourth in last place. I think I might shuffle that down if Tamayura and Thegrea aren't tied. Tamayura probably in second? I don't know, it's really hard. But let's just actually talk about Thegrea. So we have the Dark Thegrea here as well as the Light. These of course have the mechanic where if you ride one over the other, counts as Persona Ride, and you get skills if you have one in Soul, or if you have the other one in Soul, or if you specifically rode over that one this turn. Now we have Epi the Justice Thegrea here, who says when this unit is placed by riding from a grade 3 with Thegrea in its card name, you get the same name as the unit you're riding over. So if you ride over the Light with the Justice becomes the Light. Very important for later on, but this is only in the ride phase, which is also extremely important. Then you choose a Thegrea from your deck and you put it into Soul and shuffle your deck. We also have an Act on Vanguard skill once per turn. Discard a card from your hand, choose up to one grade 3 unit card with Thegrea in its card name different from this specific unit, and write it as stand. And if you wrote a card, bind the Justice that you wrote over, and then activate Persona Ride. This is a little bit different from all the other ones that we've been talking about just because of the way Thegrea works, but what you can do with this is you can use the Light in your ride deck, ride over it on your next turn, ride over the Justice copies the name of the Light, then you can put the Dark from your deck into Soul. And then finally, you can use the Axe skill. Now that you're the Light, you can take the Dark that's in your Soul and ride over it to then activate Persona Ride a second time. The skills do stack. And then on top of that, you get the skill of riding over from Light over to the Dark, right? So you get the skill that you can restand that turn. So it does help out. It does seem a little awkward at first. We have a card here that's going to be pretty important in the Retrospective Dragon, who has a skill, Auto. When this unit is placed on Radar Circle, if you have a Vanguard with Thegrea in its card name, you pay the cost of Soul Blast 1 and discard a card from your hand, search your deck for up to one grade 3 or 2 set order, reveal it, put it into your hand, and shuffle the deck. Then, at the end of the battle of this unit attack, you can retire Rearguard to give one of your glitter units 5k power. So you can retire one of your Maples, so you can use the next turn to give one of your Maples, or the Vanguard 5k power. The reason I say this guy is very important is because if you take a look at this list here, we want to make use of the 2 set order that Thegrea has. There's the one from set 8, the Looming Hatred, which you play with Counterblast 1 turn 2, and it says you draw a card when you play it, but later on you have an Axe skill where you can put that set order to drop to then ride a Thegrea from your hand over a Thegrea. Then we have the Oath of Vengeance, which, similar to Broken Toys, is very difficult to get in English. That says whenever you Persona Ride with Thegrea, you give an extra 5k, so 15k total instead of just 10k, and you draw an extra card, so you draw 2 cards. So what you can do is you use Retrospective Dragon on turn 2 to get either the grade 2 or the grade 3 order. Have the other order also, so you'll have both of these orders, right? That's how you want to go into your turn 3. You ride with the Light that's in your ride deck. You ride into that. You can use the skill of Looming Hatred to ride into the Justice. Since it is in main phase, you do not get to search or activate Persona Ride or steal the name or anything like that. Instead, what you do now is use the skill of the Justice to switch back into the Light that's in your Soul. This does activate Persona Ride. You can't use another copy of Blooming Hatred this turn because you can only ride once, but it does activate Persona Ride, so you can use the skill here of this to draw and give your front row 5k. You can do this on turn 3 when you first ride, which is very strong. If you manage to sneak in a Drilling Angel and use the Dark Thegrea and put it to Soul, you can then, sorry I smacked my mic, use the skill of the Light Thegrea to call out 2 cards as well that turn, which is pretty strong. Other than that, you do what I said before, which is you have the light. Your turn starts, you ride into the Justice, put Dark into Soul, switch from the Justice, who now has the name of the Light, into the Dark. I hope all that makes sense. But the list sort of makes use of that. So you're playing 4 copies of the Retrospective Dragon to make sure that that loop happens. We have the Cutie Cycle card here to make sure, of course, we can Soul Blast out and get that card to help us out when we ride. Also, we are playing Grade 1 Maple in the ride line because the Grade 1 Thegrea doesn't do too much for us. So we use this to Soul Blast it out, have it there. It'll retire itself after we restand something, so we can cycle that out. We're only playing 1 of the Grade 2 Maple, not in the right deck. We have to play the Grade 2 Thegrea in the right deck to make sure that Retrospective Dragon can activate, on turn 2. But we're only playing 1 Maple because we need space, and we're not making as much use of the second skill of Maple to add from Soul because the Justice binds itself, and we don't have as many Thegreas to begin with. So we don't need as many Maples. You can play maybe an extra one if you want. I'm playing 4 Mayrin and 3 Wayward Therapy Angels, so I can have some rush potential with the Marins here and have some boosters, and also the Therapy Angels because we discard so many cards between the Retrospective and also the Justice to maybe get that back. And we're playing crits and fronts because we draw so much from Persona Ride that we really don't need draws anymore. You can just get massive attacks here. For the Overtrigger, I forgot to mention for the other 2, for Kheios, I accidentally put the Dark States one. You want to play either the red or the blue one. It's up to you. I think the red one's a little bit better because you can restand your Makanis and have extra attacks. And then for Tamayura, when you go into the Veda, this guy, you can't actually use the thing you did with the original Tamayura where you would swing in, Counterblast, call out, then check the Overtrigger, restand it, you can Counterblast, call out again. Can't do that. So you can switch to another Overtrigger if you want. I still think an extra Vanguard swing is really important, but if you check it turn 3, you can still technically do double calling out, but that's up to you. I don't know if the blue one's that great. It's up to you. I think it's between the red and the Nation one, but I don't see the blue one being unplayable. But yeah, you want to use the blue one here for Thegrea because you want to give a crit to your Dark Thegrea when she restands. You can try and use the red one. You don't really have the best targets, and I don't think the Nation one is great for Thegrea. Finally, we come up to Eva, who was regarded as the best deck pretty much up until sometime before this set came out, set 11 in Japan. Now we have the Poison in Paradise Eva, who doesn't immediately put Eva back in the best deck yet. It's one of the more trickier cross rides to figure out how to put in the deck. So this says when this unit is placed on by writing over the original Eva, search your deck for up to 1 research order related to your hand, shuffle your deck, activate Persona Ride. And when this unit attacks, you bind the original Eva from your soul, search your deck, or hand, or drop for 1 obscurate, call to rear, and both the card you called out and the Vanguard get 5k. If you search your deck, shuffle, and then the card that you bound, you write it as rest at the end of your turn. And there's also this support card here, which is the Upzar Adler, who just says if your Vanguard is an Eva and you put this on Guardian Circle, you choose your obscurate from your drop, and you either put it on Guardian Circle, add it to hand, and if you put it to hand, you discard. So the main thing is that you lose the first skill of Eva here that says you Counterblast 1, look at the top cards of your deck equal to how many research orders you have. You don't really have that sort of deck thinning here with the new Eva. You do it to an extent because you add an order from your deck, and then you can use the blue order to deck thin again. But it's not the same as adding a Persona Ride or a PG from your deck. So it's been kind of tricky trying to figure out how this build is going to work. I think right now there's possibly like 4 different builds for Eva that you can try and work out. I think really only 2 of them are the most possible and that we'll actually see play. One is of course trying to use this because you can technically work out something where you like use this, discard your obscurates early, and then have not such a bad early game because you can guard more with this guy, and then also add your obscurates and whatnot. I don't think that's going to work out. There's another build that uses the cycle cards from set 11, which are focused around orders in EVA, using the blitz orders and stuff like that. I'm not a big fan of that build myself. Then there's two builds that are kind of similar, which is one is the typical build I think everyone's going to build, which is just using what we currently have for EVA, the specific build that we have right now, and then just adding in the new EVA, taking out a couple of cards, making space for a couple of copies of her. Then there's the fourth build, which I think will either be completely ignored or I think is where things are going to go, and it's kind of the build that I built, which is just playing one of the original EVA and then playing copies of the Persona ride in the new Cross ride in the main deck. I only have 3 here, just because the deck is so tight. And just focusing on just using the blue order as much as possible and drawing as many cards as you can to search your PGs rather than using EVA skill. I think the other version I mentioned is going to be the more popular one. It's probably going to be the better one, but we'll see. But I'm just following sort of the pattern of all the other builds that I've made, which is just one of the original in main deck, and then 4 of the Persona ride in, or the Cross ride in main, or sorry, 1 of the original ride deck, 4 of the new one in main deck, even though this only has 3. So this is typically what EVA has been using. I threw in the Bubble Mine just because, like, right now in English we have Bubble Mine, and Bubble Mine and Combined Rush are extremely powerful in EVA. I don't know if in this build you really need the Bubble Mine. I tested it out a little bit this build and I just really had a lot of trouble finding like a build that worked the best. This was the closest, but even then it feels really clunky. But the Bubble Mine I think is really good because you have a lot of counterblast that you need to use, and you don't want to take a lot of damage. That's kind of one of the issues that EVA has, is that she's not very good early on. She needs to sort of warm up, and then late game she's extremely strong, but early on she just really does nothing, especially now losing Combined Rusher. So I feel like having the Bubble Mine, even if it's just a rush, or just be able to not take as much damage and then have the ability to counter charge so that you can still do the 2 counterblast play that you need to do on your turn 3, helps out. I also reduced 1 copy of the grade 1 research order just because of the way the new grade 3 works. You don't really need to use the grade 1 as much. You just need 1 to protect your obfuscates and maybe an extra 1 just in case you need to, counter charge with it. But since the new one doesn't use counterblast, I don't think you have that much counterblast issue, since you do both the search skill for free and the call skill for free. You only really use your counterblast for habitable zone. But that's the logic behind that. I don't know how this is going to end up. I think it's going to be something like this. Of the 4, it's going to be up to those 2 that I mentioned. And I think it's just going to be something like this, except players are going to want to play more of the original EVA in the main deck and figure out how to switch between the 2. But I think it's just better just focusing on 1 and just going with this more narrow mindset, but we'll see how things go. So that does it for all of the Cray-Cross Epic upgrades in set 11. There are of course more stuff that came out in set 11 and before that you probably used, but I just wanted to sort of focus, do a follow-up from that video of last year. Like I kind of mentioned, we did a different system last time, but this time I think I'll just kind of like rank them like I already did, where I think the winner from all of these is going to be Kheios. Following that is kind of between Thegrea and Tamayura. Third after that is going to be Eva, and in last place it's actually between Deku. Overall, all these decks, all these units, these new cards are definitely an upgrade that pushes these decks forward. It's just that given the current landscape, some decks are either not pushed as forward or it is just not exactly what they needed, I think. But in any case, let me know in the comments down below what you think about all of this for all the Cray-Cross Epic ride lines, or even, if not, all the other new ride lines we're getting in set 11 anyways. And until next time, take care of yourselves and each other, play Vanguard, and have yourself a damn good one.